OODAcast, informing your decisions with intelligence, analysis, and insight. Brought to you by the team at OODAloop.com.
Welcome, David. Good talking to you again.
Great to be here with you, Bob, and great to see you.
You know, there's so many things I want to pick your brain on. But first, can we, for people who haven't met you yet, would you give a brief outline of your background and what you're up to these days?
Sure. The short version I say is I fell on my head at an early age, and it made all the difference. But the slightly longer version is was crazy enough to start working for the government about the age of 15. Later, when I was 17, working with some programs tied to ballistic missile defense, miniature sensor technologies initiatives 2 and 3, for those who are familiar with it. Worked at Microsoft and Yahoo briefly in the late 90s, and then joined what was called the Bioterrorism Preparedness Response Program. This was 2000. We were only 30 people. Congress said we didn't need to exist, but there were reasons. And so I was later pulled into the response to 9/11, anthrax in 2001, West Nile, severe acute respiratory syndrome. And after doing all that, did what anyone naturally would do, which was a PhD in a business school. And then after doing that and postdocs at MIT and Harvard, did what anyone would do, which was I raised my hand to go to Afghanistan and to help think differently there. Came back. That's about the time when you and I met in 2008. I was initially ghostwriting papers on a nonpartisan basis on S&T issues ranging from the future of work, quantum, even in 2009, and some other issues. Became a senior national intelligence service executive, served as the one nonpartisan with 6 Democrats, 6 Republicans, including 2 senators, 2 representatives, reviewing the R&D efforts of the intelligence community. After that, parachuted into a role at the FCC where they'd had 9 CEOs in 8 years, including 2 advanced persistent threats prior to my arrival. Good news, lasted 4 years, and as far as I know, got rid of the APTs. And then went to go work with Vint Cerf at the People-Centered Internet Coalition, behind the scenes, some activities with special operations, and then did another commission, this time 8 Republicans, 8 Democrats, including 2 senators who represented everything from cyber, bio, futures of space, supply chains, and the like, including AI. And despite the fun of doing anything bipartisan in 2020 and 2021, we succeeded. The report was hand-delivered to the Congress and the administration, the president, and more than half of our recommendations have been implemented, and as far as I know, not rolled back in the 4.5 years since. So now I operate at the intersection of data, tech, and geopolitics, and really am striving to figure out how do we keep free societies operating successfully in the next 10 to 20 years.
David, I think you left some stuff out of that because I
I'm a
have
slacker,
observed
sorry,
you
yes.
closely through these years. You are also a real change agent and a person who brings folks together. You're a great community builder, a great connector of humans, and a businessman. I have seen you in business, and you say what you will do, and you do what you say, and you're a very good businessman and entrepreneur as well.
Well, humbled, Bob, and I would say, if anything, thank you for everything you're doing with OODA Loop, and you're actually sort of the model and what I try to strive for, which is, like you said, operating at the seams of business, national security, thinking about the United States, the world as a whole, and being a great steward of that opportunity.
Right, cool. Well, let's get into some stuff that could be helpful to people. I mean, your background has given you a lot of insights into things, including biotech. You've worked very closely with that. I know you continue to track that closely. Artificial intelligence, you've been involved for all 3 waves of AI. The first wave being, the real early days of AI, starting back in the 50s. That concept of AI continues, the machine learning and even deep learning. And then this second wave, you were deeply involved in that, this Gen AI wave, pioneering thoughts on that. And now this new wave of agentic AI, you're still deeply involved in all 3 of those. And mixing this AI and bio, I think, is what I want to extract thoughts from you on. Can you give some initial context on the convergence of AI and bio?
So personally, I'm excited. And in the world in which both you and I come from, where we're supposed to see around corners and make sure, bad things don't happen. This is an area where I actually think with AI and bio, there's a lot of opportunity, both for just the general good of society and civilizations, but also from national security. And at the same time, I am increasingly concerned that there are some myths out there that need to be popped. For example, you may see certain people on the internet, for whatever reason, coming out and saying that AI is going to supercharge building biological weapons, and we're going to have designer biological weapons. It's going to be in the world. And I'm like, not exactly. I think that's confusing knowledge of something with experience in. And just like, we could ask an AI, how does one do, a liver transplant or, some complicated surgical procedure, does not mean taking that information from the AI now means you're now ready to actually go practice that actual surgery. You actually have to have experience and actually have done it. And so I think that that's one of the things that needs to be popped. The other thing is, I think the reality is, regardless of whatever humans do, we are going to see more outbreaks just because we're getting more connected as a planet. We are going to see possibly another pandemic if we're not careful. And so we should actually be focusing our attention not on somehow censoring information or things or making things not discoverable that, quite frankly, are discoverable through science anyway. It should actually be instrumenting the planet through non-obvious ways that are privacy preserving that can give us alerts. And I'll make that real quick concrete. One of the ways that we knew about the original coronavirus that later was called severe acute respiratory syndrome or SARS, we knew about it 5.5 months before China said anything because the price of garlic had gone up tenfold in Southeast Asia. And that's seen as a cure-all. So if you see a price spike, that's enough to make you go, hmm. And then on top of it, not tracking individual people, but just monitoring what we thought were the number of cars in parking lots based on the reflectivity of their windshields and their glass. We saw more cars in parking lots around certain hospitals, less cars in parking lots around factories, and that change in patterns of life was enough to make us ask the State Department twice to ask the Chinese government if anything was going on. And I understand in China, national security and public health are the same, so that each time they said nothing's going on. And it was about a week before St. Patrick's Day in 2003 when finally Vietnam raised their hand and said something's going on, and the rest is history. Unfortunately, it did not become a pandemic.
Yeah, cool. All right, let's talk more about use cases, if you don't mind, of how can bio plus AI deliver new capabilities to domains like business?
Yes. So I think it's really about making visible the invisible. Because the challenge with bio is oftentimes we don't see it, we discount it. But for example, we know increasingly that the US and other countries have been losing nitrogen from the soil. And so less than AI, although it could be AI helps with the analytics from what you get from space, but using commercial space satellites or even using drones, we should be able to show that there is a visible loss of nitrogen in the soil, and that could be through hyperspectral means. And then as a result, you could also make the case and say to a farm or to a state, we can return the nitrogen to your soil. On top of it, what we'll actually use as that source, we'll actually use methane, which is coming from your cows or other sources, natural bacteria that will pull this methane, which is between 22 and 40 times as bad as carbon dioxide is for the environment. It'll use it as a sugar source, and in the process, it'll take nitrogen from the air and return it to the soil and actually make your soil more fertile. And so I often think that the way we get through climate adaptation is actually going to be when we incentivize people to use natural bacteria. And I've seen natural bacteria, as I mentioned, that use methane to return nitrogen to soil. I've also seen, for example, natural bacteria that can sequester carbon and actually do so at 20 or 30 times better than even trees can. And so to me, this gets exciting because I think the way we actually sort of address some of the challenges of the past with pollution and other means is actually going to be using biology plus what we can see through sensing through space, and then possibly AI. And it wouldn't be necessarily, you talked about the different flavors of AI, it wouldn't be generative AI, but it would be predictive AI and models that say, if I do this, then I can start to see this sort of systemic change that makes the world better, not just for people, but actually creates jobs and actually creates whole new lines of industry for people.
Yeah, cool. What do you think about the future of AI-enabled biology for healthcare and human life?
So that is definitely coming. The thing that holds us back at the moment is twofold. One, we need whether through business means or a consortium or some other community means, we need to have better layers of models as to what's happening at the molecular level, what's happening at the cellular level for different cells, because the reality is there's lots of different cells, what's happening at the organ level, and then at the human level. I would have hoped that would have come from NIH. I don't know if it will or not, but if we can actually have those models, then you can allow both entrepreneurs and established companies to explore this space and say, if I found a molecule that has this sort of receptor or this type of shape or this type of action, we believe, based on our understanding of what's happening at the molecular, cellular, organ, and systemic level, this is what we'll see. And you can actually have personalized medicine for you compared to me. Because the reality is right now, people are giving medicine as if we're one size fits all, when in fact we know there's differences in height, size, but there's also differences in basic biology. You may be very sensitive to something. And so what looks like an adverse reaction is just that we gave you too much. I might take a medication and see no effect, and it might just be because I'm actually undersensitive or hyposensitive to it. So I am really excited about personalized medicine. I think it's going to require finding out how we use the strengths of the free market to motivate having these different models of data so that we can actually have a faster pace to try and sort of field this technology. And I think ultimately it may actually involve what I call federated learning. And when I recently had an opportunity to serve as a expert witness to Congress on AI, I called out federated learning as exciting to me because I think it's consistent with US values of freedom and privacy. And federated learning is basically, instead of the data being shipped off somewhere, you can actually run it locally. And I tell people, if you have the most recent iPhone 17, I don't, but if you do, that's equivalent to a Cray 3 supercomputer. And so you should be able to have your data, whether it's your health data or whatever data you want. Ideally, you have it in an encrypted form. And then if your doctor's office or some other healthcare provider is interested, you can then actually negotiate whether it's a treatment contract or a fiduciary contract or whatever. Their algorithm can come and learn on your data in situ on your phone. That includes all your health records and everything like that, as opposed to you shipping them off and you have no idea where they've gone. And to me, that gets really exciting because then you can truly have personalized medicine that you're carrying around on your own device.
Yeah, this is exciting. For those of us that can have those cell phones.
Well, that's what you need. That's what we need to recognize is, one, everything I just explained was incredibly technological. So how do we make it so that, I often say, my fourth grade history teacher can do it too? And that's not to, say that my fourth grade history teacher was not a technologist, but if we do not make it accessible, if we do not make it affordable, then shame on us.
Yeah.
Because now what I'm interested in, and this was actually a conversation I had, it was actually at a Tim O'Reilly event back in 2012. We lack a lot of longitudinal data about people's health. Even now, even in 2025, most of the time it's when you see your clinician that you actually have that capture, and then, maybe they're wearing a Fitbit, maybe they're wearing some other device, but for the most part, we don't have longitudinal data. The question is, if I could do a way that was privacy preserving and for the most part anonymizing my data, that data might be so valuable that at a minimum, there should be at least a subsidy for health insurance. If not, actually, the trade-off is in return for that data, I'm going to pay for your health insurance. Now, we obviously wouldn't want people to be exploited or anything like that, but I think this gets really interesting because in some respects, I think going forward, we're going to start seeing that pristine data in which you know the provenance of, and it's not synthetic, actually might be more valuable than what we've previously called legal tender, which is money. And so that's an interesting relationship if we can make sure we remove some of the asymmetry right now, because I feel like there right now is a lot of asymmetry, which is there are entities that are hoovering up data. You don't know what's going on behind the curtain. But in fact, if we as individuals say, my longitudinal health data is so important for your models to do exactly those models of the cell, the organs, and the body, in return, you should at least subsidize my healthcare, if not pay for it.
Yeah. David, did you ever read the sci-fi book Altered Carbon? It was also I guess a Netflix series or on Amazon Prime.
I read the book first. The books were better, but that's not uncommon. But yes, I did.
Well, I loved it. Very thought-provoking. And in that dystopian future, some people are so phenomenally rich, they can essentially live forever, and they can live in these massive complexes above all the squalor down on Earth. It's like an extension of the wealth inequality that we're seeing today. Um, and your thoughts about healthcare made me think of that. We in the IT world, we talked about the digital divide for a long time. Now, in healthcare, it'd be horrible if there's a digital divide there where only certain people can get access to all this incredible capability that's being built.
So one, you hit the nail on the head, and I'm a big believer that any good sci-fi does two things. It tells a good story, but it's also modern philosophy in disguise. And so when I remember, I think it was about maybe it was about 8 years ago, I read the Altered Carbon and the series that follows. I thought it was actually a commentary about 2010s, to be honest. And so and we know since COVID, there's been a K-shaped recovery for the US and the rest of the world, that some people are as good, if not better off than they were before COVID, and a lot of people aren't. I think this gets important, especially because of the work that you and I do in national security and international security as well. I would submit that we will look back and say that as early as around the 2006, 2007 era, there were people that were upset in the United States with what they felt like globalization had left them behind. And that was the first thing. And then, yes, you layer on top of this internet and this thing called the digital divide on top of it. And I'm nonpartisan, so everything I'm saying here is as a nonpartisan observer. But the reality was, in 2008, President Obama was actually kind of an anti-establishment candidate. He was sort of the dark horse that came out of, in some respects, relatively out of left field. Then we actually look at what happened in 2016. That was also a case in which both parties could have fielded an anti-establishment candidate. I think we do, and so I think people are upset with the status quo, which is kind of that ultra carbon conversation you talked about. They don't want that future in which there's some that are seen that are excessively have a lot and then everyone else does not. What's unclear though is I haven't seen, and this is what I strive to do, and I know you too as well, Bob. What is the future of work? What is the future of jobs? And I think that's really the conversations we need to be having now in the United States, in other countries as well, because you see what's happened is that anxiety about how do I provide for my family? How do I make sure, we're well off? Has now sort of been shifted to anger. You look at the Edelman Trust Barometer from 2025, where 61% of respondents around the world think it's the one they have a moderate to high grievance against one or more groups, but then 40% of all respondents think it's legitimate to do an act of violence because of that grievance. So we're kind of repeating the 1890s. I remind people in the 1890s, you actually had railroad companies that were hiring security guards that shot at workers who were actually protesting over workers' rights and working conditions. We will get through this. I think what we need are more conversations at the local level and the national level and ideally global level about how do we actually figure out how people can provide and have purpose given these rapid technological changes.
Yeah, there is rapid technological changes. I wanted to mention not just about bio and not just about AI, but largely because of AI, there are workforce changes. Now, I've seen some studies say that the dramatic changes in workforce over the last year has not been due to AI, or it's just a bit of AI. But I know too many personal friends that were in positions that they don't have now because of AI. And so I know it is significant. And I do feel like technology is going to change so very fast. And I'm very fortunate to be closer to the end of my career than the beginning. I'm wondering, and here's another thing. When Gen AI first started coming out in broadly in November 2022, I dove in and learned everything I could about it. And so did many of my friends. And we told each other, we need to do this to stay relevant. I now look back on that as kind of naive. That doesn't help you stay relevant. That's just, anybody can use this stuff. So with that as context, let me ask your thoughts on, for someone, say mid-career, what should they be doing to prepare themselves for success in this AI-enabled world?
Great question. So first, I would say we're all having to become entrepreneurs. The reality is, and this is uncomfortable for a lot of people. because I think a lot of people thought that the American, one of the promises was if I go work hard for an organization, in return, the organization will recognize my talents. They're not going to lay me off. And, as long as I'm a good worker, I've got a job for life. And you and I know that's not the reality of things, especially as these new technologies. And so, um, it's causing people to figure out what are they doing in their entrepreneurial ships, whether it's their day job or whether they're having a side hustle. I think again for mid-career as well as even early career, the idea that we're going to have just one job is probably increasingly quaint. I'm fortunate enough that I made the transition a while back where I have my own S corp and I'm basically helping 5 or 6 different entities at a given time through different relationships to help them navigate the change. But I think that's going to be what a lot of people are going to have to do is dependency on one organization or something like that is probably not going to happen. I do think we have a problem that just finding opportunities and jobs. I mean, I did an article about 2 years ago, and I was seeing where, if anything, AI has made it worse to find the talent you need, which is kind of odd, but it's only because, as we know, a lot of people are just spamming the system and flooding the system. But even back in 2009, when I was ghostwriting policy papers, I got asked two things. I got asked, one, what was the future of work for the United States, and then what were possible solutions. And so, like all things, you only have 5 days to answer this question scientifically. 2009 came back and said that by 2020, 2025, we'd have at least 5 technological revolutions. AI was one, bio, quantum, space, but also what I called at the time the miniaturization of Internet of Things, drones, and robotics. And whenever we have one, let alone 5, we know there is anxiety, there are displacements, and eventually the market corrects itself. But right now we seem to be repeating itself, including possibly bubbles. Not to admire the problem, I said you could have a college competition or a high school competition or whomever, where you invite individuals to write an app or a website that says, I'm currently X. I want to retrain to be Y. What courses do I need to take to get there? And then map it to online courses and community college offerings. And for various reasons, that did not happen, unfortunately. But I think we're now dealing with the fact that people feel like they've lost agency, not only with reskilling and retooling, but then just finding a place that needs their work. You mentioned about AI and how much are the layoffs AI or non-AI related. Um, I think right now a lot of companies are claiming efficiencies in AI that are forward-looking that may or may not be recognized. But they're able to reduce their cost, which is usually labor, and that's in a shareholder-driven economy. That is an outcome we see when we saw that in the 1890s as well. Um, I think we're going to discover, and I've already seen some cases, including in cybersecurity, that the best teams use AI plus humans, not just AI. And I've seen, for example, some really interesting cybersecurity teams where they let the AI do 2 things. One is they teach all the known vulnerabilities to the machine. So if they have to adjudicate a new app or a new piece of code or whatever, the machine does the adjudication on the known critical vulnerabilities, and then the humans look for the novel ones. But I've also seen increasingly AI that can do patterns of life that are custom to your company, but also to your industry. So that if suddenly at 9 o'clock on a Friday night, your CEO is attempting to wire money to some other place that you've never seen before, you probably want to stop that and verify if it really is your CEO versus an actor posing as your CEO or even an agent, an AI agent gone rogue. So I think there's hope. Um, but we are due for some changes. And I think if anything, I'd love to see more solutions to give people agency in both finding what they can do as entrepreneurs, as talented individuals, and navigating the change. The last thing I would say is get really good at being able to critique what an AI got wrong.
Uh,
Because I think, the reality is AI, like human, will get things wrong. But if you have enough experience and enough skills and enough ability to triangulate, you can actually be the added value that says, yep, we used AI, but I'm going to also let you know for whether it's 20% of the time, 10% of the time, here's where you need to go back to the AI and reframe what you asked or what questions you posed because the AI got something wrong.
Yep, I see that too. I think that's very smart. And as an example, I've seen people who knew nothing about programming whatsoever, and now they're using these AI-enabled programming tools for vibe coding. And it still takes work to learn if you don't have any background. But I also use those tools, and I've never been a real developer, but I've always studied enterprise IT and development tools and architectures and security and requirements. And I feel like that makes me better at this vibe coding than someone who's just starting
Oh,
out.
when you hit the, I actually got someone asked me yesterday, it was a conversation about what's the future of education because you hit the nail on the head. All signs are indicating that generative AI benefits experienced workers more because we know what to look for. We know how to detect BS. We know how to go back to the machine and say, you got this wrong, try again. Whereas new workers don't have that. And I said, I think we're going to have to start doing case studies where just like how in business school they give you case studies and they ask you like, sort out the following thing and try to make a decision. I think we're going to actually need to have a curriculum that takes new workers and say, we're going to put you through simulations and maybe they're even real, but we're really trying to see how you adjudicate like a good intelligence officer. How do I assess the quality of this data, the provenance of this sourcing? Especially, one of the things I'm tracking, and I think this is going to come back to bite us, is by 2030, more than 40% of the data on the face of the planet, if not more, is going to be synthetic in nature. So how does your business know that the very data that you're making business decisions on is trustworthy?
Yeah,
Um,
and
so I think teaching people that is going to be critical and important.
so, David, let's just as a thought experiment here, let's say there's an investment bank or it's a branch or a division in JP Morgan, and there's 50 mid-level bankers there, and the top 10% learn all these tools and lay off the other rest of the staff.
Yep.
So now let's say there's 40 people now out of work. Do we just say, look, you picked the wrong career field. You should have known. Um, and who cares about finance guys anyways? You guys are making millions. You're off on your own. Or I mean, what do we advise people like that? My hope is, as an optimist, people in that situation become innovators themselves and creators. But not everybody's going to be able to do that.
You're actually spot on. So I think a couple things is one, you're right. You would hope that they would say, look, I got laid off, but I'm going to be a good stoic and say good, and I'm going to take that layoff to create a competitor to what I'm going to be better than what they're doing. Now, the trouble was if they weren't better to begin with, unclear, but sometimes you can use that layoff experience to say, I'm going to go create a new venture in a new space because I know the field well enough to say that there's still these gaps that need to be addressed. But not everyone's going to do that. So the next thing I think that's going to have to happen, and this is going to be hard, I think ultimately we're going to all work less hours and that will still have employment. It'll just be instead of, I don't know about you, you probably do 50, 55 hours a week, if not more. I probably do as well. In theory, we're supposed to be working 40-hour weeks. It could be that the future, and there's another set of books that I love, which is Ian M. Banks's The Culture series. We're all working 20-hour weeks at most, or maybe even less. And so that way there is still purpose because we know there's an unemployment effect that people actually, if we don't have a sense of purpose, we become counterproductive to ourselves, our families, and our society. But it also adjusts for the fact that maybe everyone's just working less, but still getting compensated. And that's a way to deal with the fact that there's still 8.2 billion people on the planet. The
Yeah,
last thing I would say is we need to redefine what we consider to be work. Because right now we do not recognize taking care of an elderly family member or raising a child or helping someone in need, if you're even if you're doing it as a volunteer, as somehow being work. When in fact, I would say that's exactly the type of work we need you to do. That for the most part, AI is not going to be able to do anytime soon. Robots are coming, yes, but the hand issue is still a problem. I often joke that if you get your hands dirty, you probably have a job for the next 15 or 20 years. So that's a good strategy. But we should be able to recognize that if you choose to care for a family member, if you choose to care for a child, if you choose to care for someone in need, that is just as much valid work. And we should recognize that, especially in an era in which that's not something that AI can easily take care of.
yeah, these are good points, all of them. I appreciate that, and I agree with you. That's a good way of putting it. Get your hands dirty.
You still got a
So,
job.
uh, and I worry, and I'm trying to think. Everybody needs to take personal responsibility and get proactive and think about their individual future. but maybe we as society can also help think through some ideas.
Well, and I mean, think back to your background. I mean, you did the military, Bob. Maybe we need to have boot camps for people that have been displaced from their position. It's like, all right, pick yourself up. I know you're disappointed you got laid off, but you got a good master sergeant that's going to get you into shape and get you back out there.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just me thinking on the fly, but I think that may be the type of thing that we need people to do, because I do think there's, like you said, what I really think is our biggest hurdle of the next decade is taking people who right now think that someone else is going to save them. It's interesting on all these problems, like on cybersecurity, I go to government and they're like, I talk about how we know there's chip level hardware compromises that are happening daily. And government says, well, business will solve that. And then I go to businesses and businesses say, well, government will solve that. I'm like, oh, this is a problem.
Yeah.
So I think, if anything, I'd love to see grassroots community efforts that actually help motivate people to say, look, you are the cavalry. You have the ability to do this. And I think, we may have had that in the past through different religious institutions that are still there, but not everyone goes to those institutions anymore. I mean, what makes the US great is we can inspire people to both make something of themselves, but also we can remind ourselves that we are all neighbors, even if we disagree, even if we have differences. And so to me, this gets to be an interesting question, which is what is going to be the movement that both helps people when they need a hand? Because I think we do. That is true. I mean, if you think about the frontier, when people were, I'm reading right now Laura Ingalls Wilder's books to my 8-year-old son. I mean, they helped each other a lot. So having that spirit, but then also having that pioneering spirit that says, I'm going to work the land, I'm going to be a farmer. We need to have that same spirit for what we're doing now.
Yeah, and you mentioned Ian Banks in the Culture series, and I liked that too. And for one reason is, I mean, it's got to be entertaining, and those were good stories, good drama, good conflict, but also he made it clear that you don't have to be afraid of the AI. Um, and some of the worst villains in the series were human beings.
Yes.
but um, but to me, I enjoyed the optimism in that book. I mean, in that series, and I enjoyed the fact that AI wasn't the evil villain.
Well, and what I love about, and this circles back to where we're talking about, I really do think through bio and AI, space, and more, we can increase the agricultural yields of this planet by 30 or 40%, which would be wonderful. We should be able to feed everybody. The reality is we already produce more than enough food. We just don't get it to right places. We can solve a lot of other problems. I think, when AI is made the boogeyman, it really is a scapegoat for larger issues, which is you can replace the word AI with human organization. And how do I know that a human organization is making good decisions? How do I know if a human organization is not biased? How do I know if it doesn't have less than benevolent intentions towards me? And the challenge is that's a harder question to address. And so we use AI as a stalking horse when in fact there's some very real human issues we need to address. And I'm optimistic we'll figure them out. But I can remember, so I got approached by Singularity University in 2014 to talk about exponential biology, and they loved it. They said, this is great, but you used the word governance. What is governance? And I said, well, it's how we make sure it's not anarchy. And he said, well, we don't believe governance is needed. I said, look, I said governance, not saying governments, but governance. But we went our separate ways. And then in 2017, they said, well, maybe there's something to governance. Could you be our faculty chair for disruption and governance, which I thought was a fascinating pairing. But even then, it's trying to teach CEOs of companies, but also community leaders, that the choices you make in your products and services will have ripple effects over we become more free as people and we celebrate and preserve those freedoms, or less. And I would say we're now in 2025 where it matters increasingly less what nations do. It more is the design choices that are baked into products and services at the business level. And I think ultimately that's going to be where the business says, look, I want to do well as a company, but I also want to do right in the world. And that's hard because if you have shareholders, they may be pushing for everything ROI maximization. But I would say if we don't figure out a way to keep our markets still going and still have individuals that want to buy your products and services, we may find that we were incredibly short-term thinking in 2025, and 2026 was spicy, is probably the best way to put it.
Yeah, cool. Well, David, thanks for the time and thanks for bringing some insight into all these issues. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob, as always, and thanks for everything that you do at OODA Loop.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this OODA Loop production. For the latest analysis on cybersecurity, technology, and global risks, please visit www.oodaloop.com.